Jill Biden calls Jasmine Crockett a mistake. Her response destroys his career on air. Fact-based jaw-dropper. Did you know a single offhand comment can alter entire political careers? One remark in Washington has done just that. Promise of story. Tonight we unpack how a few words from First Lady Jill Biden, calling Representative Jasmine Crockett a mistake, erupted into a war of perception, and how Crockett's on-air response didn't just defend her, it may have ended a major political player's credibility. Viewer challenge. Quick question. Do you believe one sentence can end a career? Drop a yes or no in the comments, and I'll show you why the answer is harder than you think. What if the spark that shifts an entire political landscape isn't a scandal, or a poll, or even a major policy blunder, but instead just a single cutting word? That's exactly what unfolded when First Lady Jill Biden, in what seemed like an uncalculated remark, referred to Representative Jasmine Crockett as a mistake. Now, on its own, the word might sound trivial, almost forgettable, but in politics, nothing exists in isolation. Every syllable carries baggage, and in this case, the baggage was heavy enough to ignite a storm. For context, Crockett isn't just another name on Capitol Hill. She's a freshman legislator with razor-sharp wit and a way of talking that cuts through canned sound bites like glass on stone. When power players dismiss people like her with loaded one-word labels, they underestimate the cultural ripple effect, and in this case, that misstep was magnified by Crockett's ability to turn mistake into a badge of defiance. The truth is simple. The public rarely remembers policy details, but words that sting, those stay tattooed in headlines and hashtags. Crockett capitalized instantly, reframing the insult not as a wound, but as undeniable proof that the establishment feels threatened by a rising voice. And here's the practical takeaway. In today's media ecosystem, dismissive language doesn't weaken opponents, it energizes them. One insult becomes a slogan, and one misstep becomes a rallying cry. Politics isn't just about policies anymore, it's about mastering the art of narrative combat. That's the power and the danger of words. Here's a question that often goes unasked. How much real influence does a First Lady wield? We tend to picture the role as ceremonial, smiling at events, hosting dinners, championing safe, apolitical causes. But history shows us something different. From Eleanor Roosevelt shaping civil rights discourse to Michelle Obama redefining key aspects of cultural conversation, First Ladies have long carried invisible authority. Their words may not be written into legislation, but they often echo louder than a press secretary's briefing. That's why Jill Biden's comment about Jasmine Crockett hit like an unexpected thunderclap. She wasn't speaking as a strategist or a policy advisor, yet precisely because she spoke as the First Lady, her remark carried double weight. On the surface, she seemed to be voicing a personal judgment. Beneath the surface, it came across as a signal from the very center of power, the inner circle around the president. And when that circle calls someone a mistake, it plants the idea that the administration itself shares the sentiment. This dual role, supportive spouse and unofficial gatekeeper, makes a First Lady highly influential, even in moments that appear casual or unscripted. The public interprets her voice as both intimate and institutional at the same time. The real-world lesson? Never underestimate secondary power sources in politics. Authority doesn't always wear a title. Sometimes it comes in through the back door, wrapped in a remark that feels personal but lands like official policy. In Washington, Then whispers echo loudly. Imagine being a freshman lawmaker walking into Washington, a place where hierarchies are already carved, seniority dictates access, and newcomers are often expected to quietly earn their place. Jasmine Crockett didn't play by those rules. Instead, she carved her presence with sheer volume, wit, and an unapologetic authenticity that resonated with younger, more digitally native audiences. She's not the politician who reads from a stiff script. She's the one who calls things out directly, with sound bites that feel tailor-made for the Twitter generation. Her background as a Texas legislator prepared her for this exact arena. In her home state politics, she developed a reputation for sharp retorts, fiery debates, and dismantling critics with precision. So, when Jill Biden's comment hit the airwaves, Crockett wasn't blindsided. It was almost as if she had been preparing for this exact kind of dismissal her entire career. She knew how to flip ridicule into empowerment. This matters because political reputation today is no longer built only in committee hearings or policy rollouts. It's sculpted in real time across digital platforms, where the ability to command attention outweighs seniority or pedigree. Crockett represents this shift, a politician who thrives because of her capacity to channel authenticity into moments of friction. The wider impact is clear. Dismissive labels don't diminish a figure like Crockett. In a hyper-connected world, they spotlight her even more. The actionable truth? In modern politics, being underestimated is an opportunity, and Crockett turned underestimation into rocket fuel. Think about the moments in politics that people still talk about decades later. Strangely, they're often not dense policy speeches or legislative victories. They're sound bites, seconds-long clips that go viral before viral was even a word. Remember Howard Dean's famous "Scree in 2004? That single moment overshadowed an entire campaign platform. Or consider George Romney in the 60s claiming he was brainwashed. 2 seconds of phrasing that ended his presidential hopes. These weren't policy collapses, they were soundbite implosions. This is the unforgiving reality of modern politics. Words don't just explain policy, they live or die as ammunition, replayed in loops until they stick like glue. Jill Biden's remark about Jasmine Crockett landed squarely in that category. Media thrives on the sharp, the controversial, the clash of personalities. So instead of lengthy policy debates, editors clipped the mistake line and pushed it into headlines, reels, and talking points. Overnight, it changed the conversation, not about the Biden administration's priorities, but about how they treat emerging voices. For Crockett, this wasn't bad news. It was prime oxygen. Because the same machinery that can tear careers down can also elevate underdogs into household names. She understood instinctively what many seasoned politicians forget. You don't run from a soundbite, you weaponize it. And here's the takeaway. Every word a public figure utters today is a recording waiting to reemerge. If you can't control the soundbite, you'd better know how to flip it, because clips outlive speeches. Always. Here's something most people underestimate. Politics isn't about facts, it's about feelings. Ask 10 voters about a candidate's policy, and most will recall only fragments. Ask those same voters how a candidate made them feel during a controversy, and the answers come rushing back with certainty. That's why Jill Biden's mistake comment didn't stay as a critique. It transformed into a rallying moment. Perception, not intention, drove the narrative. Crockett understood this instinctively. Instead of lashing out in anger, she framed the insult as a backhanded compliment. She leaned into the idea that if the establishment saw her as a mistake, it meant they felt threatened by her presence, her influence, and the new energy she was bringing. That reframing flipped the script. She took a dismissal and turned it into proof of relevance. Suddenly, news cycles weren't painting her as a victim. They were painting her as a fighter who refused to be sidelined. This dynamic matters because politics is rarely evaluated in real time by objective analysis. It's filtered through identity, emotion, and media framing. If someone is publicly diminished, yet responds with poise and strength, the dismissal backfires hard. Voters project resilience onto that figure, and resilience is political gold. The lesson is sharp and simple. Policy might win the long game, but perception wins the moment. Crockett mastered the moment, and in a digital world, the moment is the battlefield. One insult became her narrative upgrade. Momentum shifted. Why does the word mistake sting so sharply? The answer lies less in politics and more in psychology. Humans are wired to crave acceptance. Social belonging is as essential to us as food and shelter. When someone labels you a mistake, it goes beyond criticism of action. It invalidates your very presence. It doesn't just say you're wrong, it says you don't belong. And in high-stakes arenas like politics, questions of belonging cut even deeper. That's why Jill Biden's remark resonated far beyond one interview. It wasn't policy critique, it was identity dismissal. For many viewers, especially those who felt underestimated or excluded, seeing that kind of rejection play out publicly tapped into something deeply personal. And when Crockett chose to respond not with shame, but with confidence, isn't just rebutting Jill Biden, she was symbolically speaking for anyone who's ever been told they're not supposed to be here. That flips personal psychology into public power. Media coverage amplified this psychology tenfold. Every time mistake replayed on television or online, it triggered the same emotional reaction in audiences. Some sympathized with Crockett, Others questioned Jill Biden's intent, but nobody stayed neutral because words that dismiss identity force people to pick sides, and taking a side in politics cements allegiances. Takeaway: never invalidate an opponent's legitimacy. Attack policies if you must, but not existence, because the moment you label someone a mistake, you risk transforming them into a symbol, and symbols are untouchable. If there's one thing modern media can't resist, it's the scent of political blood in the water. Controversy guarantees clicks, drama fuels ratings, and conflict sells more efficiently than any balanced explanation of legislation ever could. Jill Biden's mistake remark served up the perfect ingredients: a high-profile figure, a sharp insult, and a rising political star ready to clap back. Networks didn't just report it, they amplified it, framing the exchange as a battle royale. Within hours, the story wasn't tucked away in political sections. It was splashed across viral feeds. Headlines focused less on context and more on conflict. First Lady attacks rising representative versus Crockett fires back with defiance. Why? Because friction is easier to package than nuance. It's the same formula that made past political feuds like Sarah Palin versus the press or Hillary Clinton versus her critics constant fixtures in the news cycle. Once media latched on, the situation stopped being a private misstep and became a public verdict. And in that arena, it didn't really matter what Jill Biden meant. What mattered was how her words were replayed, reframed, and recycled as fuel. The story was no longer about intention, it was about spectacle. Here's the danger. When networks sense scandal, narratives spiral out of your control. The only question is whether you'll be the one cornered, or the one catapulted forward, and Crockett, recognizing the storm, chose to ride the wave instead of resisting it. That's survival through spectacle. Some politicians panic when under fire. They scramble for apologies, issue overlong explanations, or retreat into silence, hoping the storm passes. Jasmine Crockett chose none of those paths. Instead, she delivered a counterpunch that turned the entire exchange into proof of her strength. That's the difference between reaction and strategy. When Jill Biden's mistake comment gained traction, Crockett didn't deny, deflect, or beg for legitimacy. She reframed the attack as validation. Her message was sharp. If powerful insiders are calling me a mistake, it means I'm doing something right, because real change always threatens comfort zones. That subtle turn transformed the insult into a badge of honor. Rather than diminishing her, Jill Biden's words became an amplifier for Crockett's brand. She wielded narrative jujitsu, using her opponent's strike as leverage to showcase her resilience. Audiences responded because there's something universally compelling about someone who takes rejection and molds it into pride. Crockett embodied defiance, the kind that doesn't just defend, it inspires. Media commentators noticed, too. Some called her response political alchemy, turning an intended put-down into political capital. Instead of a defensive figure, she appeared as the fighter standing tall. In a culture where authenticity sells, Crockett's handling wasn't polished spin, it was raw confidence, and confidence travels fast. Takeaway: the smartest defense isn't denial, it's transformation. When insulted, don't absorb the blow, flip the frame. In politics, turning criticism into confirmations isn't just survival, it's strategy, pure and simple. In today's political arena, the real stage isn't Congress, it's the digital feed. A fiery committee exchange might reach a few hundred viewers live, but a 30-second clip on TikTok or Twitter, that can reach millions by nightfall. Jasmine Crockett understood this reality better than most of her colleagues, and her response to Jill Biden's mistake comment became the perfect test case. Within hours, snippets of Crockett's fiery rebuttals, her raw confidence, and even her sarcastic one-liners were circulating across platforms. On TikTok, creators remixed her soundbites into trending edits. On X, hashtags bearing her name shot upward, drawing not just political junkies but casual users who had never watched C-SPAN in their lives. By sunrise, Crockett's response wasn't just political news, it was cultural currency. The velocity of that attention mattered. A single primetime interview might deliver an audience of a few million once, but social media replays that moment endlessly, turning Crockett's defiance into a meme, a slogan, and a symbol. Every share multiplied her visibility, cementing her as more than a local lawmaker. She had stepped into the national spotlight. Here lies the broader lesson. Digital virality is faster and more enduring than traditional campaigning. A viral clip can convey character better than a 50-page policy outline. For Crockett, the insult to rallying cry pipeline unfolded in real time, and she wrote it expertly. In modern politics, he who controls the clip controls the narrative, and Crockett just proved it. Before we dive into the wildest twists of this feud, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next time a single sentence rewrites political history. Now, let's talk about the move that truly flipped the battlefield. Every political storm eventually forces insiders to ask a brutal question. Is this just noise, or is it the beginning of real fallout? Jill Biden's mistake comment about Jasmine Crockett quickly moved from the chatter phase into the impact phase. Behind closed doors, advisors, strategists, and party loyalists began quietly worrying, not just about the soundbite itself, but about what it signaled. If the First Lady, a powerful surrogate with cultural influence, could make such a casual dismissal, what did that reveal about the discipline, or lack thereof, inside the president's circle? Analysts immediately spotted the shift. Networks called in experts who framed the moment not as a minor slip, but as a credibility hit. One strategist put it bluntly: perception often corrodes influence faster than fact. That was exactly what started happening. Every replay of the clip chipped away at Jill Biden's gravitas. Instead of being the First Lady who uplifts, she became the First Lady who dismisses. Meanwhile, Crockett's stock climbed in equal proportion. Bookings on primetime shows surged. Grassroots donors cited the mistake moment in fundraising pitches. The same spark that weakened Jill Biden's circle strengthened Crockett's base. Dual impact. One word, two opposite trajectories. Here's the takeaway. Credibility isn't lost in an instant, but the erosion can start with a single fracture. And when the media spotlight magnifies that fracture, it spreads like cracks in glass. In politics, small slips rarely stay small. They metastasize quickly. When pressure mounts, most politicians respond with stern seriousness, believing gravity earns respect. But Jasmine Crockett took a different route. She laced her counterattack with humor, and that move proved more disarming than any fiery rebuttal. On live interviews, she leaned into sarcasm, cracking that if she was a mistake, then apparently, mistakes make history. The line landed laughs, clips spread fast, and her critics suddenly looked uptight while she looked unshaken. Humor in politics is no small weapon. Psychologists argue that laughter isn't just entertainment, it's a power shift. Humor lowers defenses, makes audiences feel connected, and reshapes tension into levity. Crockett used it masterfully, sidestepping the image of a wounded politician and instead embodying someone strong enough to turn criticism into a punchline. Laughing at the insult robbed it of its venom. History shows us the impact. Ronald Reagan famously neutralized concerns about his age in 1984 with one witty line. Barack Obama often leaned on humor at White House correspondents' dinners to deflate critics. Crockett tapped into this same timeless weapon, but in a more accessible, everyday way. She wasn't reading a scripted joke. She was naturally quick, raw, and memorable. The broader lesson? Humor isn't weakness, it's dominance disguised in a smile. When you can laugh at yourself and laugh at your critics, you strip their attack of power. For Crockett, humor didn't just protect her image, it strengthened it, showing she could outwit while outlasting. That's political agility at its sharpest. At first glance, some insiders tried to downplay Jill Biden's comment as a harmless slip of the tongue, but in Washington there's no such thing as just a slip. Every remark is data, every unscripted word is analyzed for what it reveals beneath the surface. And in this case, the mistake comment didn't look like an accident. It looked like a window into the Biden inner circle's strategic blind spots. Here's why that matters. Effective political messaging requires unity. When voices at the top fracture even slightly, the message to the public fractures too. Jill Biden's words suggested not just a personal irritation with Crockett, but a lack of alignment within the broader Democratic establishment. Was this how senior figures truly viewed up-and-coming progressive leaders? If so, the rift between old guard and new generation wasn't speculation. It was visible, undeniable. This was the real blunder, not the soundbite itself, but what it symbolized: poor message discipline. The best political teams anticipate conflict and neutralize sparks before they flare. Here, the unauthorized flame came not from an opponent, but from the president's closest partner. signaling weakness in the armor. And the takeaway is critical. Missteps don't just damage the individual who makes them, they expose the machinery around them. Jill Biden's remark raised questions about control, coordination, and credibility. In politics, perception of disorder is almost as dangerous as disorder itself. Little cracks don't hide, they spread. Every political feud is more than personal. It's symbolic. And in the clash between Jill Biden and Jasmine Crockett, one of the clearest symbols to emerge was the generational divide. On one side, the established guard, older, seasoned voices who've shaped politics for decades, comfortable with hierarchy, cautious language, and deliberate messaging. On the other side, a younger, insurgent generation, blunt, digital native, less polished but more resonant with voters who crave authenticity. Crockett embodies that fresh energy. Her rise didn't come from decades of carefully cultivated alliances, but from her unapologetic presence and her ability to connect directly with plugged-in audiences. Jill Biden, whether she intended it or not, positioned herself as the voice of the establishment pushing back against that energy. To younger voters, especially those who felt overlooked, this looked like rejection, but to Crockett's advantage, rejection became a narrative of resistance. This divide isn't unique to Democrats. It exists across politics. The tension between experience and disruption defines how power shifts. In Crockett's case, the gene. Rational dimension gave her an added weapon. She wasn't just fighting back against an insult, she was symbolizing a movement that sees itself as the future. The lesson? Political gravity is tilting. Aligning with youthful authenticity isn't optional anymore. It's survival. Leaders who fail to recognize this risk alienating the very base needed to carry elections. The old structures still hold weight, but the new voices hold momentum, and momentum always wins the present. In politics, words carry weight, but sometimes silence is even louder. After Jill Biden's mistake comments spread through headlines, many expected prominent allies to step in quickly with statements of support. A few brief defenses trickled out, but noticeably, most big names stayed quiet. And in Washington, quiet is not neutral. It's damning. Here's why that silence mattered. Political allies usually rush to contain damage. A strong network rallies instantly, issuing clarifications, reframing narratives, or distracting the media cycle. That rally never came here. Instead, commentators and insiders noticed the hesitation. Was it disagreement? Was it discomfort? Or was it strategic distance, with allies choosing not to tie themselves to what looked like a losing battle? Regardless of motive, absence of defense only amplified the sense that Jill Biden's credibility had slipped. For Crockett, the silence was golden. Each non-response by establishment figures signaled that she wasn't isolated. Jill Biden was. When no chorus rises to defend your words, it feeds a perception of weakness. And in the ruthless arena of politics, perceived weakness invites challengers and emboldens rivals. The larger takeaway is sharp. Count your allies before you step into a fight. Their silence can sink you faster than your opponent's attack. In moments of controversy, support isn't just helpful, it's survival currency. Jill bid. Ian's allies chose hesitation over loyalty, and that hesitation transformed one comment into a bigger narrative. The establishment wasn't sure if it wanted to defend her. Not every politician knows how to seize a fleeting controversy and convert it into momentum. Jasmine Crockett did, and she did it almost effortlessly. Within just 48 hours of Jill Biden's mistake remark, Crockett was booked across major media platforms, from cable news primetime to popular podcasts. What might have been a damaging insult instead became her launchpad, earning her recognition on stages she hadn't accessed before. Why was this a win? Because political media isn't just about defending your reputation, it's about expanding your audience. By stepping into interview after interview, Crockett turned what could have been a vulnerability into a showcase for her wit, resilience, and relatability. Viewers saw not a shaken lawmaker but a rising star unafraid to face questions straight on. Each appearance reinforced her narrative. She was underestimated, she was dismissed, and yet she was still standing taller. The ripple effect here was massive. More interviews meant more clips, more shares, and more discourse, keeping Crockett's name circulating long past the initial controversy. What should have been a damaging blow turned into a career accelerator. The clear takeaway? Media storms are only destructive if you hide from them. Step into the storm, and you might just ride the winds higher than before. Crockett didn't avoid the cameras, she chased them, and in doing so, she proved an instinct every modern politician must learn. Controversy can cripple you, or it can crown you. How you react decides which one. When political firestorms erupt, it's rarely just about the spark, it's about the aftershocks. Jill Biden's mistake comment didn't simply create drama for a few days, it created long-term headaches for the Biden circle. Advisors and strategists found themselves fielding uncomfortable questions. Did this reveal deeper cracks in the team's discipline? Was the First Lady being properly briefed? And perhaps most dangerous of all, did her words echo private sentiments whispered behind closed doors? In politics, perception becomes reality. Once doubt takes hold, opponents use it as leverage. Republican strategists frame the comment as evidence of Democratic division, while progressive voices within the party cited it as proof the establishment underestimated rising leaders like Crockett. Essentially, Jill Biden had unwittingly armed both sides. Her critics exploited the blunder, while her supposed allies used it as fuel for reform demands. Experts weighed in with dire warnings. As one analyst put it, gaffes don't just disappear, they become leverage points your opponents will replay endlessly. That's exactly what began unfolding. Every time Jill Biden appeared in public, reporters circled back to the remark. Every silence from key allies hinted at unease. The immediate insult had faded, but the shadow it cast remained. The big takeaway? In politics, the danger isn't the isolated slip. It's the way missteps linger and metastasize. Jill Biden's words didn't just dent a reputation, they shifted the ground beneath her circle. Trust once shaken doesn't bounce back easily, it echoes. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Modern politics isn't primarily about governing, it's about storytelling. Policy details may shape the future, but narratives shape the present. And the clash between Jill Biden and Jasmine Crockett revealed that fact in glaring fashion. One word, mistake, didn't alter legislation, but it reshaped reputations and recalibrated who held momentum in the public eye. This shows how much the battlefield has shifted. Campaigns used to hinge on position papers, town halls, and carefully crafted speeches. Now they hinge on split-second soundbites that ricochet through digital platforms. In an era where voters consume politics through memes, clips, and headlines, storytelling defines electability, and the best stories often emerge not from planned campaigns but from unexpected conflict. Crockett grasped this reality instinctively. She turned the insult into a narrative of resilience and visibility. Jill Biden, by contrast, struggled to control the story. That contrast illustrates the new political rulebook. Narrative agility matters more than institutional authority. You can hold tenure, titles, and proximity to power, but if you can't shape the narrative, you lose ground. Fast. For aspiring leaders, the lesson couldn't be starker. In today's environment, you must script your own myth, or someone else will script it for you. Politics is no longer just legislative chess, it's narrative combat fought across a million screens. Crockett walked away stronger not simply because she survived the insult, but because she mastered the story arc built around it. And in this age, the story is the power. Every feud leaves behind winners and losers, but what makes this story remarkable is the sheer contrast in outcomes. Jill Biden's one-word remark, meant to diminish Jasmine Crockett, ended up reshaping the trajectory of both women's influence. Crockett emerged more visible, more relevant, and more embraced by audiences outside her usual base. Jill Biden, on the other hand, walked away with her credibility bruised, her words lingering like a shadow over her role as First Lady. Behind the scenes, Democratic insiders began whispering about the long-term damage. Could Jill Biden still be the trusted bridge between the president and younger voters? Or had this single remark widened a generational divide too stark to mend? Meanwhile, Crockett was receiving invitations to higher-profile stages, not just as a guest but as a rising voice to be contended with. One misstep elevated her from a congressional freshman to a national figure. That's the dual reality. One insult created two opposing futures. What was meant to silence instead amplified, and what was meant to assert, insider authority, instead exposed vulnerability. In politics, careers don't always collapse from scandals, they bend from perception shifts, and perception has now clearly bent in Crockett's favor. Here's the final takeaway. Destiny in Washington often turns on small moments. A word dismissed as trivial can set the stage for transformation. Crockett gained a platform. Jill Biden lost stability. And once trajectories diverge like that, the course of careers is rarely reversible. Recap. A single phrase, mistake, became Crockett's anthem and Jill's undoing. Tease. And next, we'll uncover another career-defining feud that proves once again, silence is riskier than speaking up.